Hi, welcome to Views of Zion, a look at the history and theology of Mormonism. Today we're going to be examining the evidence for Mormonism and the Book of Mormon. Let's get things started off with this video. Is there any historical evidence for the Book of Mormon? Because Joseph Smith made such an effort to bolster his religious claims with physical proof of their history, this question deserves a careful answer. His first evidence was the golden plates, seen only by himself and 11 witnesses. But in 1838, witness Martin Harris publicly admitted that none of the witnesses had physically seen the plates. They had only seen them in a vision. 3 of the 12 apostles immediately left the church. But Smith did not give up on trying to produce physical evidence for his stories. He identified a hill in New York as the site of 2 cataclysmic battles, but no evidence has been found, a pile of stones in Missouri as the altar of the biblical Adam, again no evidence, a skeleton as a Lamanite warrior, no evidence, Egyptian papyri and the Kinderhook plates as ancient records supporting his translation claims. The evidence here shows he could not have been more wrong. And he labeled Native Americans as Lamanites, ancient Jews from the Book of Mormon. But extensive DNA and cultural studies have found no evidence. This carries on today, with not a single artifact, ruin, or record supporting any Book of Mormon historical claims. There's simply no trace of the populous, city-building, technologically advanced societies it claims lived in the Americas for hundreds of years. In fact, Thomas Stewart Ferguson, the head of the only church-sponsored archaeological study meant to prove the Book of Mormon, lost his faith as a result of finding nothing. There have been unofficial stabs at linking a few sites to Book of Mormon stories, such as the so-called Lehi's Cave and the Tree of Life stone. But the evidence is so exaggerated that even many Mormon scholars disagree. One discovery has received some official attention: a rock altar in the Arabian desert engraved with the letters NHM. Some Mormons claim this is proof of Nahum, a Book of Mormon location south of Jerusalem. But not only could NHM form many other words by combining vowels differently, it's not necessarily even a place name. Yet even with such a flimsy connection, the official LDS publication Ensign called the rock the first archaeological find that supports a Book of Mormon place name. The best Mormons can do is to attempt to show that archaeology might not rule out the possibility of Book of Mormon claims. For example, there's a long list of things that the Book of Mormon says existed in the Americas, which history and science contradict. So they'll take horses and say, maybe it means deer, or maybe there were horses that didn't leave any evidence. But using this kind of hopeful speculation on every single issue just makes the lack of positive evidence that much more glaring. So nothing can vouch for the Book of Mormon except the testimony of the man who dictated it by looking at a magic rock in a hat. Take into consideration how it clashes with history that can be proven, and it leaves you wondering why the most correct of any book on earth has absolutely nothing concrete to justify its problematic claims. Instead of a faith supported by evidence, Mormonism is faith in spite of the evidence. There's more at ldsvideo.org. Let's begin with something that wasn't in the video, but is a popular evidence for Mormons: chiasmus. A chiasm is a writing that repeats itself in such a way that it can make a pattern, like this: I am stuck on Band-Aid brand 'cause Band-Aid's stuck on me. When you outline the pattern, the left side is in the shape of the Greek letter chi, hence chiasmus. Sometimes it's found within a single verse, and sometimes it's spread out thematically through an entire passage. But the Bible is chock full of chiasmus. So the argument is that the presence of chiasmus in the Book of Mormon is evidence of its ancient Semitic origin, because they don't think that Joseph Smith could have written chiasmus himself. While it's true that chiasmus was not a hot topic in Smith's day, there had been writings on it, and people like Benjamin Franklin and William Shakespeare had used it in English. But, like that Band-Aid line, sometimes chiasmus is so obvious that anyone could copy its format, even if they didn't know the term chiasmus. So my first observation is this: if Joseph Smith wanted to write a book and make it sound like Scripture, like the Bible, the first thing he would do would be to copy the styles used by the Bible, including chiasmus. If I wanted to write something that sounded like Shakespeare, I'd open up Hamlet and copy the styles. I wouldn't need to be a highly educated language expert to do that. There's actually a whole list of different sentence structures used in ancient Hebrew that are also found in the Book of Mormon. Again, some people take this as evidence of the Book of Mormon's ancient Hebrew origin. But all of those sentence structures are also found in the King James Bible and can be easily imitated. Second, as even Mormons will admit, chiasmus often happens accidentally. For example, could you imagine just rattling off something like this? I drove to the store to get groceries and ran into Bill. Then Jeff walked up to us out of nowhere. Bill had to get going, so we went and paid for our groceries at the same time. Then I drove home. Well, that pretty normal sounding story is also chiasmus. So as you can see, the presence of chiasmus in the Book of Mormon doesn't really mean a whole lot, especially if Smith was just imitating the Bible's style. So the argument basically boils down to this. Some Mormon apologists just personally don't think that Smith wrote them, even though it's perfectly reasonable that he could have. But the biggest problem with the Mormon chiasmus argument is James Strang. Strang was a man who tried to gain leadership of the Mormon Church after Joseph Smith died. He claimed that he had dug up and translated his own ancient metal records, just like Smith did. 3 Book of Mormon witnesses, 3 apostles, and Smith's mother all believed Strang for a time. And guess what was in Strang's writings? Chiasmus. So if chiasmus somehow proves that Smith's writings were authentic, then Strang's should get the same benefit of the doubt. And that means that Strang must have been right, and he should have led the church instead of Brigham Young. But I've never heard any Mormon go down that road. A more fundamental issue of evidence is that of the golden plates, the alleged source of the Book of Mormon. Is there any reason to believe that Smith really had them? Especially considering Brigham Young's story about how Smith got rid of them. When Joseph got the plates, the angel instructed him to carry them back to the hill Cumorah, which he did. The hill opened, and they walked into a cave in which there was a large and spacious room. And there were altogether in this room more plates than probably many wagon loads. They were piled up in the corners and along the walls. Well, they know where Smith's hill Cumorah is, but this big cave filled with metal records that's supposedly in it has never been located, even though it would conclusively prove Smith's story. There was another early attempt to discern whether or not Smith actually had something like the plates. From what we can tell, Martin Harris's wife was testing Smith. Martin Harris took home the first 116 pages that Smith claimed had been translated from the gold plates, and then they disappeared. Now, if Smith actually had the plates, he would have easily been able to reproduce those lost pages word for word, and proven that he had a source and wasn't just making it up as he went along. But that's not what happened. Instead, Smith received this very convenient revelation. And behold, Satan hath put it into their hearts to alter the words which you have caused to be written. And behold, I say unto you, that because they have altered the words, they read contrary from that which you translated. Behold, I say unto you, that you shall not translate again those words which have gone forth out of your hands. For behold, if you should bring forth the same words, they will say that you have lied, and that you have pretended to translate, but that you have contradicted yourself. To me, that seems like a very unlikely excuse. It would have been obvious if someone had tampered with his manuscript. And so an opportunity to give just a little evidence that his claims were true was skirted. And since Smith was also conveniently forbidden from just showing people the plates, we have to rely on him and 11 family and friends witnesses to support their existence. But the 3 main witnesses, Martin Harris, Oliver Cowdery, and David Whitmer, all had fallings out with Joseph Smith and Mormonism. And Harris was reported to have said that he never saw the plates with his natural eyes, only in vision or imagination, neither Oliver nor David, and also that the 8 witnesses never saw them. He said he had hefted the plates repeatedly in a box with only a tablecloth or handkerchief over them, but he never saw them, only as he saw a city through a mountain. And yet, even though they only saw the plates in a vision, they never denied that the Book of Mormon was true. And this is the argument that Mormon's claim supports the existence of the plates. But other things happened in the lives of those witnesses, such as Harris leaving Mormonism and becoming a Quaker, and Whitmer claiming that the Lord told him to separate himself from the Mormons. Mormons never ask us to believe that those testimonies are true, just the ones about the Book of Mormon. The other issue is that what possible motivation could these witnesses have for denying the Book of Mormon? If they ever wanted to be taken seriously again, the last thing they would do is admit that they had intentionally lied to people for years about the plates. Think of the possible consequences of coming clean to thousands of Mormons who had given their lives to follow Joseph Smith, that they had been complicit in a massive deception. Obviously, they had plenty of motivation to stick with the story once they were in, and were still left with no compelling evidence for the plates. Some Mormons will respond that the Book of Mormon itself is evidence for the plates, because there's no way that Smith could have written it on his own. Well, we need to dispel a myth that Joseph Smith was just some illiterate farm boy. Sure, he only had a 3rd grade education, but he also wrote speeches, letters, diaries, revelations, and the history of the church. He was a writer. And this isn't unprecedented in the 19th century. Seventh-day Adventist prophet Ellen G. White also only had a 3rd grade education, and she managed to write way more than Smith did. Furthermore, Smith's own mother tells about his active imagination and early interest in the same kind of stories that would later be found in the Book of Mormon. During our evening conversations, Joseph would occasionally give us some of the most amusing recitals that could be imagined. He would describe the ancient inhabitants of this continent, their dress, mode of traveling, and the animals upon which they rode, their cities, their buildings, with every particular, their mode of warfare, and also their religious worship. This he would do with as much ease, seemingly, as if he had spent his whole life with them. Seems like Smith was fully equipped to write the Book of Mormon. And on top of that, it's pretty clear that he borrowed from other sources around him too. Not just for the Book of Mormon, but for his other stories as well.
Where did Mormonism come from? Is it based on literal events, or did Joseph Smith draw inspiration from somewhere else? Smith's first vision was first recorded in 1832, but others in the area had published similar visions years before Smith did. They were stirred by a passage of Scripture, went into the woods in the morning, knelt to pray but couldn't speak, felt that others were around, seized by a power, then despair, then weakness, felt near to death, saw some remarkable light, like above the brightness of the sun, saw God and Jesus in bodily form with indescribable glory, told all churches were corrupt, more specifically that their professors were corrupt, and there was more information that couldn't be written. Of these visionaries, one was a well-known preacher who visited Smith's community, one met with Smith's family, and one had his vision published in the Smith's local newspaper, all before Joseph recorded his vision. Smith also claimed that he had received the golden plates, a record of the ancient Nephite people, from the angel Moroni in 1827. That same year, an English translation of a story called The Golden Pot was published, about a man who received a record of the ancient Atlantean people from the spirit Lindhorst. The author had even been promoted in Smith's local newspaper. The story similarities include: both men are meditating when they see a great light, get shocked, and meet a messenger in a vision. Both have 3 visions in one evening. Both are called to transcribe records from an old civilization and are promised a seer device. Both messengers are the descendants and archivists of their civilizations, are called Prince of the Spirits, and can appear in the form of an amphibian. Going to retrieve the records, both men encounter an evil power, are chastised for not being serious enough, and are told to wait 1 year to see if they will be allowed to receive them. Both visit vast chambers with treasures, breastplates, dazzling light from an unknown source, a library, and tripods with Egyptian artifacts. Both men are injured by evil spirits, pass their final test, and get access to their records on the fall equinox. The story content of the Book of Mormon, published in 1830, could easily have been inspired by a book called View of the Hebrews, first published in 1823 in Poultney, Vermont. Both books are about Hebrews leaving the Old World, sailing to the uninhabited Americas, and becoming the ancestors of the Native Americans. They split into 2 people groups, one barbarous and one civilized. There is a change from monarchy to republic. A Messiah figure visits. The Christian gospel is preached in the Americas. Whole chapters of the book of Isaiah are quoted. After long wars, the barbarous eventually destroy the civilized. But there is a lost book of God left buried in a hill. Oliver Cowdery, a witness to the Book of Mormon, was from Poultney, Vermont, and met Joseph just after the second printing of View of the Hebrews. Later, Smith even quoted and cited the book in an article. So all the necessary building blocks of Smith's new religion were close at hand, and even though he supplied plenty of his own details, it's fairly obvious that they're hung on the framework of these sources. So is it more likely that Smith's experiences were really genuine, or that they developed from his own absorbent imagination?
And there's plenty of other sources Smith could have drawn inspiration from. For example, Smith claimed he was led to the hill Cumorah by the angel Moroni. Well, near Africa, there's an island chain called the Comoros, and the capital is Moroni. And yes, that does predate Smith. Or take his borrowing from the Bible. Most of the names in the Book of Mormon are lifted directly from the Bible or just changed slightly from the Bible. For example, the Bible's Kish becomes the Book of Mormon's Achish. Abinadab becomes Abinadi. Antipas becomes Antipas. Nahum becomes Nahum, and so on. The name Nephi comes from the Apocrypha. There's also whole stories that mirror the Bible's. For example, the Bible's Noah is like the Book of Mormon's Jaredites, stories about building boats and filling them with animals. Then there's Herod and Achish, both stories about a woman who dances in exchange for someone's head to be brought to her on a platter. And Paul and Alma, both persecutors of the church, converted by a vision, and then become traveling missionaries. Those last two stories even use surprising amounts of the exact same wording from the Bible. And then, of course, there's geography. The LDS Church does not have an official position on where Book of Mormon peoples and places were supposed to have been, but just imagine that they were around Smith's area of the country, in the northeast. Here's the narrow neck of land and the East and West Sea. Now see how the names of Smith's Book of Mormon cities bear a striking resemblance to the real cities around him. The real-life Moravianton becomes the Book of Mormon's Morianton. Kishkamenitis becomes Kishkamen. Jacobsburg becomes Jacobagath. Shiloh becomes Shilom. Oneida becomes Oneida. Sherbrooke becomes Shur. Agath becomes Ogath, and so on. That's an awful lot of coincidence. So could Smith have written the Book of Mormon? Sure looks like it to me.
Well, unlike the Bible, where we know that there are actual places that are mentioned in the Bible, there's plenty of places like Capernaum and Hatzor, Dan, Bethsaida. There's a lot of places that people can actually visit that are mentioned in the Bible. Unfortunately for the Latter-day Saint, they don't have that same luxury. You won't find any of the place names that are unique to the Book of Mormon narrative that have ever been discovered. So if you were to take a tour, let's say, to the alleged Book of Mormon lands, you could end up either flying to New York or flying to Central America. That's how diverse the views are, even within the Mormon Church. There is no official position in the Mormon Church today as to where the Book of Mormon people supposedly lived. There is no evidence that people such as Nephites ever existed. In fact, not far from where we are, if you were to go over to the History Museum and ask for their room where they keep all their Nephite artifacts, they might look a little bit surprised at that question because they have no Nephite artifacts. There's nothing to prove that Nephites ever existed. Mormons have to take that by faith, and really by a blind faith. Whereas the Bible speaks of real people and real events, the Book of Mormon basically is really distinguishable by its fictitious nature. There's really no strong evidence to support a lot of the things that it says in it when it comes to actual cultures or actual places, especially what I mean is by unique places to the Book of Mormon. The Mormon Church leadership will not take a firm position as to where these supposed Book of Mormon lands are really located. The Mormon Church is divided on that issue. You have some in one camp that believes in what's known as the limited geography theory, which places the Book of Mormon lands more down in Central America. And then you have what's known as the Heartland model, which places the Book of Mormon lands more in the United States area. These two groups really don't agree with each other. Both, of course, think that they are right, but I don't think really either of them has enough evidence to prove their position. Well, for most Mormons, they would probably say that it doesn't matter to them, that they don't really believe Mormonism at all because of any type of substantial evidence or anything like that. They believe it because they have a feeling that Mormonism is true. So for many Mormons, they would probably look at it as a matter of faith on their part, that they are trusting what they believe was written down by Joseph Smith from the gold plates that came from ancient prophets. To them, it would be a badge of honor to believe it even without the evidence. And certainly to believe things without proof is faith. But if there's enough evidence to disprove what you believe, that's really not faith, that's foolish. And unfortunately, when it comes to the things of Mormonism, there is a lot of evidence that tends to disprove the claims, the truth claims of Mormonism, to where, in my opinion, it would be foolish to continue trusting in it. Well, to say that Joseph Smith could not have made up so many details that somehow were proven later on, I guess we have to define the word proven. Because again, I don't think there's the evidence that actually supports that conclusion. Did Joseph Smith have the intellect that he could have invented a story such as the Book of Mormon? In my opinion, probably. I mean, you look at what J.R.R. Tolkien came up with as a young man, and certainly he came up with a whole nother language. Joseph Smith never went that far. But a lot of the things that Joseph Smith, I guess you could say, brings to the table, such as place names or names of individuals, are not all that difficult for any individual, I would think, to do. You got to remember that a lot of Mormons, they come with this presupposition that Joseph Smith is a prophet of God, and it's the Book of Mormon that actually supports that presupposition. So of course they're going to have to believe that the Book of Mormon is a historical book that talks about real people and real events. And again, the problem is what's the evidence to support that? When we look at the evidence for the Bible, There's nothing to compare between the two books, nothing at all.
Another issue of lack of evidence is how odd it is that there is literally nothing that definitively proves that any of the Book of Mormon predates 1830 or so. With the Bible, there are thousands of manuscripts, some that date back to within decades of the apostles, which, if nothing else, prove that the Bible is ancient. Not so with the Book of Mormon. Its only attestation is the manuscript that Joseph Smith dictated. With the Bible, the existence of Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Egypt, Babylon, Assyria, and many other peoples and places are conclusively proven. There's nothing like that for Book of Mormon peoples and places. We have undeniable evidence for Incas, Aztecs, Mayans, Toltecs, Pueblo peoples, and mound builders in the Americas. Even the handful of Vikings who stayed here temporarily left something. But when it comes to Nephites and Lamanites, there's just nothing. Mormon apologists find stuff like this to help bolster their case, saying that there are possible sites for Nahum and Bountiful in Arabia, or that there are authentic Egyptian names in the Book of Mormon when non-Mormon scholars disagree, or that there's been found an ancient seal in Israel with the name Malkiyahu, son of the king, inscribed on it, and that could be the Book of Mormon's Molech, and so on. But when you compare these trifling possibilities against the mountains of incontrovertible evidences for biblical history, it just looks like grasping at straws. It makes you want to say, okay, that's interesting, but where is Zarahemla? Do you have anything better than just possibilities? Why don't you have any positive IDs? The point is that with the Bible, there's at least some measure of a foundation in reality that even non-Christians can't deny. Mormonism, on the other hand, is exactly the opposite. Now let's talk about evidence relating to Mormonism and Joseph Smith that can actually be examined, the Book of Abraham. The Book of Abraham was supposedly translated from some Egyptian papyri, and they're unique in Mormonism. Unlike the golden plates, they were delivered by a salesman, not an angel. And Smith never felt the need to get some family and friends to sign a testimony that the papyri existed. And he was never ordered to return them to a mysterious cave. So there's actually something to look at. In 1835, Joseph Smith purchased some authentic Egyptian scrolls from a traveling antiquities dealer and claimed they were written by the very hands of the biblical figures of Abraham and Joseph. That same year, Smith translated from the papyrus what he called the Book of Abraham, which was later canonized by the Mormons in the Pearl of Great Price. This included 3 facsimiles with explanations as to how they were pertinent to the text. The Book of Abraham lays the groundwork for many Mormon doctrines, including the plurality of gods, the pre-existence, the exaltation of man, and blacks not being able to hold the priesthood. It also mentions Kolob, the star nearest to where God lives. The papyri were thought to have been lost in the Chicago Fire of 1871, but were found in the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art in 1966, along with an affidavit from Joseph Smith's wife that these indeed belonged to him. When examined by Egyptologists, it was found to be a common Egyptian funerary text from over 1,000 years after the time of Abraham. There is absolutely no relationship between Smith's Book of Abraham and the actual Egyptian writing on the papyri. Even Smith's interpretations of the facsimiles were incorrect. For example, here Smith describes an Egyptian priest trying to kill Abraham. But in actuality, it is the god Anubis resurrecting Osiris from the dead. Since this would conclusively prove that Joseph Smith lied about being able to translate ancient documents and apparently made up the Book of Abraham, Mormons went into damage control. Defenses for the Book of Abraham include that it was all symbolic and Smith figured out the true meaning. 2. Smith received a revelation that was inspired by viewing the papyri. But this is clearly in opposition to the claims of Joseph Smith and the traditional church belief that he made a literal translation from the text. He even wrote a small book on the Egyptian alphabet and grammar, which is totally inconsistent with the non-literal argument. And this isn't an isolated case. In 1845, Smith was brought the Kinderhook plates, 6 small pieces of brass with mysterious writings on them. Smith claimed to translate some of them and found them to be an ancient document from a descendant of a pharaoh. But as it turned out, they were actually forgeries created for the specific purpose of exposing Smith as a fraud. They have even been examined by modern scientists and proven to not be of ancient origin. The LDS defense of this is to claim that all of the records that tell of Smith translating them are lies. So when Joseph Smith's claims as a translator have actually been able to be tested, they have failed, which of course calls into question the integrity of the Book of Mormon. There's more at ldsvideo.org. So here's what they found. In Joseph Smith's Egyptian alphabet and grammar, he left detailed translation notes. On the left side, he drew the Egyptian character, and on the right, wrote his English translation. A fragment of papyrus was found that contained the same characters he used in the same order he used them. Modern Egyptologists prove that Smith's translation here was bogus. So since he was willing and able to fake an ancient religious document on this occasion, what's to say he didn't do the exact same thing with the Book of Mormon? Regarding the Kinderhook plates, Mormons claim that Smith never actually tried to translate them and wasn't fooled by them. But both Smith's personal scribe, William Clayton, and Mormon apostle Parley Pratt said that he did. Furthermore, in the official history of the church, written in the first-person point of view of Joseph, it says this: I insert facsimiles of the 6 brass plates found near Kinderhook. I have translated a portion of them, and find they contain the history of the person with whom they were found. He was a descendant of Ham, through the loins of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and that he received his kingdom from the ruler of heaven and earth. The historical record clearly shows that Smith claimed to have translated part of those plates, and they were unquestionably a hoax. So why do Mormons try to claim that he didn't, when there's no evidence for their claim? Well, they have to demand that position, or admit that Smith was intentionally lying. It's so important to uphold the integrity of their prophet and translator that they're forced to make claims that simply don't mesh with reality. So I think that Smith being caught red-handed on these 2 occasions brings the lack of evidence for the Book of Mormon into clear focus. There's no evidence because it's just as fake as Abraham and Kinderhook. It perfectly fits a pattern of deception. So why is this important? Why look at all these evidences and try to trap Smith? Because Smith claimed that he was visited by God and was personally tasked with restoring the true church. Then he introduced strange doctrines and practices never before seen in Christendom, and has since convinced millions of people that he was the real deal. But since he's not the real deal, his church and doctrines are a fraud, and millions are being deceived. Now frankly, if there was no such thing as true Christianity, then this deception wouldn't really matter in the scheme of things. But as a Christian, I do believe there is a truth. And part of that truth is that people who follow the false God and false doctrines of a false church do not know the real God, and have no hope of salvation from judgment. So to me, and many other Christians, these issues about Joseph Smith could not be more deadly serious. So my plea with anyone who considers Smith's religion to be a genuine article is this: look at the evidence. God gave us critical thinking skills for a purpose. True faith does not need to be divorced from reason. There's nothing in the Bible that gives the impression that God demands faith in spite of the evidence. So please, revisit the Bible without the baggage of what Smith claimed about it or added to it. Thanks for watching. You can visit ldsvideo.org for more videos and information, and you can email me at viewsofzion@gmail.com with any comments or questions. We'll see you next time.